Good evening. I'm really glad you're here. Tonight's episode is a little different. Usually we explore a topic through research, psychology, or stories from other people's lives. But once a month, I'd like us to simply talk. Not because there isn't science behind what we are discussing, there often is, but because sometimes life teaches us things long before we discover that researchers have given those lessons a name. Tonight, I want to talk about dogs. Not how to train them, not which breed is best, not whether you should get one. Instead, I want to talk about what living with dogs has quietly taught me about movement, happiness, responsibility, and even emotional balance. Now, before anyone accuses me of being biased, I absolutely am. I have lived with dogs for almost my adult life and also many of my teenage years. Before my current companions, I had a Giant Schnauzer named Bite. He lived for 17 years with an incredible age for a dog his size. The last years of his life weren't always easy. He suffered from epileptic seizures, and watching someone you love lose control over their own body is heartbreaking, whether they have 2 legs or 4. You learn very quickly that love isn't always the fun part. Sometimes love is cleaning up after a seizure at 2 in the morning. Sometimes it's cancelling plans because your dog isn't well. Sometimes it's sitting on the kitchen floor waiting for them to recover while pretending you're calm, even though your heart is racing. After he passed away, I wasn't sure I'd ever have another dog. But life has a funny way of making room for new friendships. Today, I live with 2 very different personalities. One of them is sitting with me on my balcony right now, breathing steadily, listening to the swallows circling around in the sky, and probably smelling something that I can't smell really. That's Pepe, my 12-year-old Border Collie. If you know Border Collies, you'll know they're widely regarded as one of the most intelligent dog breeds in the world. They were bred to think, solve problems, and work closely alongside people. Then there's Mara. She's hiding somewhere inside the apartment. She's a Yakutian Laika, another working breed. Beautiful, independent, smart, and occasionally convinced that she has much better ideas than I do. Of course, every dog is an individual, regardless of breed, but generations of selective breeding do shape certain behavioral tendencies, and both Pepe and Mara remind me of that every single day. People often tell me how lucky I am to have such wonderful dogs. They are wonderful. But what many people don't realize is that wonderful dogs don't simply happen. Working breeds were never designed to spend their lives sleeping on sofas. Border Collies were bred to herd livestock, making constant decisions. Yakutian Laikas helped people survive harsh Arctic conditions by pulling sled, hunting and working independently. Those aren't dogs that become tired after walking around the block for 10 minutes. If anything, that's just a warm-up. So every single day, rain or shine, cold or heat, tired or energetic, we go outside. Sometimes we walk, sometimes we train, sometimes we play games that challenge their minds rather than simply wearing them out physically. And honestly, there are mornings when I don't feel like doing any of this. Maybe work has been exhausting, maybe I slept badly, maybe it's raining outside, sideways. But dogs don't understand excuses, they understand routines. And that's one of the greatest gifts they've ever given me. They don't negotiate with my motivation, because motivation is unreliable. Discipline isn't. There's an idea that author James Clear explores in Atomic Habits. I mentioned him a couple of times before. He argues that lasting habits aren't built by waiting until we feel motivated. They're built by making the desired behavior that obvious next step. Dogs do that exactly that. There isn't really a decision. The lead comes out, we go outside, it's simply what happens. I often wonder how much less active I'd be if I didn't have dogs. Would I still go for an hour's walk after a stressful day? Maybe. Or maybe it's just a lie I'd like to tell myself and believe in. Maybe sometimes I would do it, but probably not nearly as often. Researchers have consistently found that people who regularly walk with their dogs tend to accumulate more physical activity than those who don't own dogs or rarely walk them. Now, that doesn't mean owning a dog automatically makes someone healthier. But for many people, dogs remove one of the biggest obstacles to exercise. The endless internal debate. Should I go now? It's cold, it's hot, I'll do it tomorrow. Dogs don't care about tomorrow. They don't care what it looks like. They need today, and because of that, they quietly improve ours. Another researcher whose work I really like is Jules Pretty from the University of Essex. He has spent years studying what he calls green exercise, physical activity in natural environments. His research suggests that even relatively short periods of walking outdoors can improve mood and reduce stress. Looking back, some of my clearest thinking hasn't happened sitting behind a desk. It has happened with a lead in one hand and two dogs stopping every 30 seconds to investigate something that was obviously fascinating and very important, even though I couldn't see it. But movement isn't the biggest lesson they've taught me. The biggest lesson is probably emotional regulation. There's something extraordinary about coming home from a frustrating day. Perhaps you've had an argument, a difficult meeting. Something didn't go according to plan. You walk through the door carrying all that emotional weight, and before you've even taken your shoes off, someone is simply delighted that you exist. Not because you achieved something, not because you're successful, not because you earn more money, not because people agreed with your opinions online. They're happy because you're home. That's it. Full stop. John Cacciapio, who spent much of his career researching loneliness, showed that loneliness is less about being physically alone and more about lacking meaningful social connection. Dogs don't replace human relationships, of course. They shouldn't. But they do provide companionship that many people find deeply comforting. Sometimes after a difficult day, that quiet, uncomplicated welcome is exactly what we need before we're ready to reconnect with the rest of the world. Of course, let's not make this whole event super romantic. Owning dogs is expensive. Food, insurance, training, equipment, unexpected trips to the vet, additional costs when you go to a hotel or rent an apartment. Anyone who tells you dogs are cheap either doesn't own one or has been incredibly lucky. That's not my case. Then there is time. This might actually be the biggest cost. Working dogs don't just need walks. They need jobs, mental stimulation, consistency. Training never really ends with them. People sometimes ask me whether my dogs are well behaved. I usually smile and think, they're well trained today. Tomorrow we'll start all over again. Because training isn't something you finish, it's a relationship you maintain. And that's another lesson that extends far beyond dogs. Most worthwhile things in life aren't achieved once. They're practiced repeatedly. Friendships, marriage, health, patience, you name it. None of them are destinations. They're habits. Pepe has taught me that intelligence without direction quickly becomes mischief. Leave a Border Collie bored long enough and they'll invent their own entertainment. Tearing down wallpapers, eating furniture, chewing on your expensive shoes. This usually happens at your expense. Mara reminds me that independence isn't always stubbornness. Sometimes she's simply evaluating whether my idea is worth following. Because she sees and senses things I cannot see, sense, or even comprehend. And honestly, occasionally she's right. Brian Hare, one of the world's leading researchers in canine cognition, has shown just how remarkably good dogs are at reading human social cues. Living with dogs has made me wonder whether the opposite is true as well. Whether we become better at reading others because we learn how to read our dogs. You begin paying attention, noticing body language, recognizing stress before it becomes panic and turns into a conflict. You see excitement before it becomes chaos. Listening without words. How many human relationships would improve if we became half as observant? There's another thing dogs are remarkably good at: being present. They don't spend today's walk worrying about tomorrow's walk. They don't replay yesterday's mistakes. Every interesting smell deserves investigation. Every stick might be the greatest stick ever discovered. Every puddle is an opportunity. We spend enormous amounts of energy trying to become more mindful. Well, dogs simply are. Perhaps that's why walking them often feels like a therapy. Health psychologist Kelly McGonigal has written extensively about how movement changes our relationship with stress. Exercise doesn't magically erase life's problems, but it can help our bodies and minds recover from them. I've solved work problems while walking dogs that I couldn't solve sitting in front of a computer. Not because the dogs had the answers, of course, although sometimes I suspect Pepe thinks he does. But because walking creates space. Silence creates space. Nature creates space. Dogs make sure I experience all three. People sometimes ask me whether I'd recommend getting a dog. My answer surprises them. Not necessarily. If your lifestyle doesn't allow it, don't. If you're hoping a dog will fix your loneliness, think carefully. If you don't have time to train, please choose differently, especially if you're considering a working breed. Love alone isn't enough. Dogs need commitment, routine, patience, exercise, learning, sometimes sacrifice, sometimes cancelled weekends, sometimes muddy floors, sometimes sleepless nights, and sometimes a heartbreak. Because one day, if everything goes as it should, you'll have to say goodbye. That's the cruel agreement we make with every dog we welcome into our lives. We almost always outlive them, and somehow, knowing that doesn't stop us from loving them anyway. Perhaps because they teach us something incredibly important. Life isn't valuable because it lasts forever. It's valuable because we share it. When I think back to my Giant Schnauzer bite right now, I don't remember the seizures first. My first thought are the adventures, the time we spent together, the lessons he taught me, the walks we had, the ridiculous moments, dangerous moments, the ordinary evenings. I remember 17 years of friendship. Not the difficult ending, even though it's still there, with me. And when I look at Pepe and Mara today, I know that one day they'll become memories too. That's saddening, but it's also beautiful, because it reminds me to appreciate today's walk, for which they are waiting very, very patiently. It reminds me to appreciate today's training session, today's muddy paw prints, today's ridiculous game with a tennis ball, the ordinary moments. They're rarely ordinary while they're happening. So, have dogs made my life easier? Absolutely not. They've made it busier, more expensive, more demanding, more complicated. But they've also made it healthier. They've made me move when I didn't want to move, laugh when I didn't feel like laughing, slow down when I was rushing, notice the seasons, leave my phone in my pocket, spend time outdoors, also build routines, practice patience, and perhaps most importantly, they've reminded me that happiness isn't always found in making life more comfortable. Sometimes happiness arrives wearing muddy paws, wagging its tail, looking at you as though you've just returned from crossing the ocean, when really you've only been at work all day. Thank you for spending these last few minutes with me. If you have a dog sleeping somewhere nearby, perhaps give them an extra scratch behind their ears tonight. They probably won't understand why, but they'll appreciate it anyway. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time on St. John on Air.